YouTube, it's Zoe, and today I have a pretty big and pretty exciting book haul to share with you all. I didn't think that I would ever call a book haul exciting, but I think this one is, personally, because of two reasons. Reason number one is that I have quite a few books from the library to share with you all. I have never done a library book haul before, at least I don't think so, because I didn't think people would be interested in watching me haul books that aren't permanently mine, but I watch quite a lot of library book hauls myself, and I thought, if I watch them, then maybe other people will too. I am going to the library much more now that I am back home and I have a better library system than I did up at university, so I'm planning for the time being on doing monthly book hauls that mostly feature library books. In the past, I've only done book hauls maybe every 3 to 4 months, or in this case, this has been 5 months since I last did a book haul, but I am excited to go to the library more and share what I'm currently reading. I went a little bit overboard with getting library books this month because I am finally back at the library and there were so many good books, so I got them all, and I don't know if I can read them all before I have to return them, but I will learn my lesson. But you gotta support your local library. I am doing my civic duty. I also don't have any library fines yet, so we're all good as of now. Anyway, the second reason why this is an exciting book haul is because I have a giveaway to share with you all. So this is a paid promotion with Disney Book Group, who is also offering the prizes for this giveaway to celebrate the release of the Artemis Fowl series, all 8 books by Eoin Colfer. When I read these books as a kid, I called him Eoin Colfer, but he's Irish. You say his name, Owen. Now I know. But these books have been all redesigned in these, oh gosh, they're falling over, these gorgeous covers, because guess what? You probably already know if you are a fan of Artemis Fowl like I am. There is a movie from the Walt Disney Studios coming out in a couple of months based on these books, and I'm excited. Also, Judi Dench is in it. It's directed by Kenneth Branagh. Gilderoy Lockhart from Chamber of Secrets directed this movie. Gilderoy Lockhart has many skills. These are the redesigned covers. I don't know if you can tell, but they're so colorful. They're so pretty. The nostalgia of just looking at this series. My older sister was very into these books and I wanted to be cool and read the books too. Also, each book has a sneak peek to the Fowl twins, which is the new novel coming out by Eoin Colfer. So this series is living on, and we're getting a movie. And you can win all of these books too. Yes, all 8 books, plus a backpack, plus a hat, plus a fidget spinner, and some chocolate. Do it all for the chocolate. No, I'm just kidding. These are really good books. I loved them when I was a kid. If you were just getting into reading, or you really want to know what the series is about before you see the movie, or if you want to read it along with a younger sibling or your kid, I think this would be a really great story to share with somebody else, because they brought me and my sister together when we were kids. If you want to enter this giveaway and get all of these books, first you need to be subscribed to my YouTube channel. Secondly, you need to leave a comment down below letting me know what book from my book haul you think I should read first. Do leave the words "enter me" along with a book. Thirdly, the most important step, don't forget to do this, there is a Rafflecopter link down below in the description. Click it and enter all of your information, including your mailing address, because I need to mail you all of the giveaway stuff. All of that being said, good luck, and I hope you'll win these books. Again, thank you Disney Book Group for sponsoring this video and for sponsoring the giveaway. Moving on to the book haul. Well, the first couple of books that I'm going to haul are, guess what? The 8 books in the Artemis Fowl series by Eoin Colfer. Actually, fun fact, a couple of days before they contacted me asking if I wanted to be an Artemis Fowl ambassador, which sounds so fancy, I purchased the first book for myself because I wanted to reread them before the movie came out. And then they ended up sending me all of the books, which was so nice. So I sent the first book that I purchased for myself to my little brother because I want to buddy read them with him. If you don't know what this series is about, it is a middle grade fantasy series, but it's not a run-of-the-mill medieval European based fantasy series. Yes, there are similar creatures like fairies, gnomes, dwarves, goblins, but this series is pretty high-tech. It mirrors our own society. There are police squads, I think there's mafias in this book too, except they are run by fantastical beasts. So the police squad is run by fairies. And when I was a kid, I was obsessed with fairies. I thought I was a fairy. I read every book I could that had fairies in it. And I went into this book expecting nice, happy fairies, but they're kind of violent, kind of dangerous. Not the fairies I was expecting, but I thought this was such a fun twist on them. So our main character is Artemis Fowl. He is 12 years old. He is a genius criminal mastermind. He is cynical. He will do what he needs to do to get ahead, to get some money, bring back his family's fortune, and that even includes, in the first book, capturing a fairy to hold her for ransom. Down here at the bottom, there are different symbols, and you can figure out what everything means once you go back through the book. That was one of my favorite parts of reading these books. The first favorite part was fairies. I just looked up when these books came out, and I've only read, I think, the first 4 or 5, because the last book came out in 2012 when I was in high school, and I only read these books in elementary school and I think early middle school. So I don't even know how this story ends. The next book I have to share with you all is Queen of Air and Darkness by Cassandra Clare, the last book in the Dark Artifices trilogy, and I am scared to read this. I haven't read it yet. I went to the book signing back in December. I have a whole vlog if you want to watch my experience. I embarrassed myself in front of Cassandra Clare. I have not read this book yet because it's supposed to start right after that ending occurred, and I'm just not ready for that right now. Like I mentioned earlier, I tend to do book hauls every 3 to 5 months, meaning that I have quite a lot of books that I purchased during October for the spooky season that I have not shared yet. The first being Chilling Adventures of Sabrina by Roberto Aguirre, Sacasa, and Robert Hack. This is a graphic novel based on Sabrina the Teenage Witch, but then they made it very dark and satanic. I already read this. It haunts me until the end of my days. It is not pleasant to read. It's interesting, but is it pleasant? No. So many nightmares. I purchased this because Netflix made an adaptation of this that they released back in October. So I thought, I'll read the graphic novel and then I'll watch the TV show. I was excited because I really enjoy Sabrina the Teenage Witch, the pleasant version. And then I read this, and then I thought, nah, I don't really want to watch the adaptation. If you want to be severely spooked, here you go. The next spooky book I purchased is significantly less frightening. It is Warren the 13th and the Allseeing Eye, written by Tanya Del Rio and illustrated by Will Stille. This is an illustrated novel for children, so it will not, hopefully, give you nightmares. This is about Warren the 13th, who works at his family's ancient hotel as the errand boy. He's the bellhop, he's the groundskeeper, he's anything he needs to be. This is a spooky mystery. Warren has to find a hidden treasure called the Allseeing Eye, but he has to solve a few mysteries to get to it. And the last 2 spooky books are 2 books in a series, the Diviners series by Libba Bray. I read the first book, The Diviners, back in October and I really enjoyed it, so I immediately went out and purchased the next 2 books in the series, and I have since not read these. This whole video is just showing me how many books I purchased and then have not actually gotten to. But FYI, so far in 2019, I have not purchased any books. I got some books from the library, but I have not purchased any. So we're getting better here, folks. This series is set in 1920s New York, and it follows a group of teenagers known as the Diviners who all have superpowers in a way. Our main character, Evie, she is kind of an annoying 1920s modern flapper girl, but her power is to touch objects or people and read the past. Stevie moves to New York to live with her uncle who works at the Museum of the Occult, and as luck will have it, or misfortune will have it, right when she arrives, things start happening. Occulty things. We have a demon killing people around New York. I like to go into the first book in the series knowing basically everything about it. I love to research the crap out of books before I read them, but not so with sequels. So I will just say the first book in the Diviners is so good, and I hear that the rest of the series just gets better. Then I have Next Year in Havana by Chanel Clayton, which is a realistic fiction romance, I believe, which follows two different protagonists, a grandmother and her granddaughter, during two different eras of time in Cuba. So we first follow a 19-year-old named Elisa, who is the grandmother, back in 1958. She is very sheltered from the political unrest that is occurring in Cuba at the time because she is the daughter of a sugar baron, but she falls in love and soon realizes what is happening in her country. Then we follow Elisa's granddaughter, Marisol, in 2017 in Miami. She grew up hearing Elisa say such beautiful things about Cuba. One day when Elisa passes away and is cremated, her last wish is for Marisol to go back to Cuba and spread her ashes there. Marisol goes and sees what Cuba is like in modern times and learns about some new family members, I believe, and falls in love. This also reminds me a little bit of The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, which was my favorite book of 2018, mostly because of the two different perspectives from 2 points in time. I love that story tool. I want more people to keep writing books like that. The next book I have is Radio Silence by Alice Oseman, one of my favorite books of 2018, so I'm really happy I purchased it. Actually, I first read it as a library book, and then I liked it so much that I purchased a physical book to have on my shelf so I can refer back to it. This book spoke to me. This follows a teenage girl named Frances who lives in the UK, but in the United States we would call her a high school senior. She is in her last year before she goes off to university. Frances is very much focused on academics. Her dream is to go to the University of Cambridge, so she is always working on schoolwork. She is at the top of the class, she is head girl, and she doesn't have much time left over for friends. But when she does have some spare time, she devotes it to making fan art for her favorite podcast named Universe City. One day, the creator of Universe City sees her fan art and asks her if she would be willing to become the official artist for Universe City. She obviously says yes because that's her favorite podcast, and when she says yes, she realizes that the creator of the podcast is a boy she knows in real life named Alice. Soon they become friends in real life. They help each other through some pretty dark times, the most pure, platonic, affectionate relationship. This book deals with academic pressure, struggling with figuring out what to do for the rest of your life at such a young age, sexuality, mental illness. I really enjoyed it, and I'm happy that I have my own copy in my hands now. Next, I purchased Americanah by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. This is a realistic fiction book which follows two characters who are young and in love, living in Nigeria when it is military ruled. They decide to leave Nigeria. Ifemelu, I hope I'm pronouncing her name correctly, but she leaves for America. Obinze hoped to follow her, but because the borders were closed in America after 9/11, he instead goes to London where he lives undocumented. Then 15 years later, Nigeria is democratic. They go back and hopefully, I think they fall in love again because I hope it's true love. So many reviewers that I trust gave this book 5 out of 5 stars. I think she's a brilliant woman. She's also from Nigeria, so I am excited to see how she writes Nigeria and how her characters' relationships with themselves and the new countries they move to, as well as the relationships with each other and the country where they were born, changes throughout this novel. Now, we talked earlier about a book with a podcast in it. Here's another book with a podcast in it, Sadie by Courtney Summers. I loved this book. I listened to the audiobook of this, and wow, the audiobook has sound effects, has an actual podcast which sounds like a podcast, a whole cast of characters. I mentioned earlier how much I enjoy two perspectives from two different points in time, and that's what this book has as well. The first perspective we have is Sadie's perspective. She grew up basically raising herself and her little sister after their mother left, but then one day her little sister is found murdered. Sadie sets out to find the murderer and avenge her little sister. The second perspective is that of a podcast host who has a podcast on small town murders. He goes to her small town in Colorado, interviews her friends and families and other people in the town, and then he follows Sadie's steps to where she is at the end of the book, but he's a few steps behind her. There's no comic relief in this book. It's just sad, but also so well written. It covers pedophilia, sexual abuse, drug abuse, murder. It's a lot, but it's not sensationalized. You don't actually see a lot of it happening on the page. You might hear a few references to it, but it mostly focuses on the victims. The next book I bought was Jane Steele by Lindsay Fay, which is a gothic retelling of Jane Eyre, but Jane Eyre is a murderer. Surprise! This is one of my friends, Joss from Squibbles Reads. This is one of her favorite books, so that already gives it some very high praise. We have another book that I've already read and really enjoyed, so hopefully this doesn't turn into another book review. It is An Absolutely Remarkable Thing by Hank Green. This is a sci-fi story set in our current world. It follows a 23-year-old named April May who lives in New York City. One day she's coming back from work when she spots a 10-foot tall statue-looking thing. It kind of looks like a transformer, so she asks her friend named Andy, who is a YouTuber, to come on down to this corner of New York at 2 or 3 a.m. to film the transformer-looking thing. She eventually calls it Carl. They post the video to YouTube. It becomes one of the most watched, or the most watched video in the entire world, because it turns out that these Carls have popped up all over the world at exactly the same time. No one knows how it happened, and they cannot move the Carls at all. April is the first person to have ever had contact with it. So she becomes the unofficial expert and ambassador to the Carls. She gets fame, power, money. She's on news shows and talk shows. She has a great voice in what's happening. You learn what happens with the Carls, but it mostly focuses on how power and fame corrupts April May. It's good. It's also the first book in a series, so I am excited for the next book to come out. That ending. I have a book that I bought at the airport bookstore, which is Josh and Hazel's Guide to Not Dating by Christina Lauren. It follows one person named Josh and one person named Hazel. They've known each other since college. They haven't always been friends. 10 years after college, they meet up again, and there's some attraction in the air, but they decide to not date. They're just going to be friends. You know what friends do. They set each other up on very bad blind dates, because that's friendship. That's not secret love at all. You know that they start to fall in love. Hazel kind of reminds me of Jessica Day from New Girl. She's quirky. I hate that word quirky. Josh is the opposite of her. Opposites attract. He's more in his own head, whereas she's all over the place. I have a book that I didn't even know was a book until quite recently. It is Howl's Moving Castle by Diana Wynne Jones. I love the Studio Ghibli film. I grew up with it. I've heard that this is pretty different from the movie, but not in a bad way. In fact, a lot of people that I know prefer the book over the movie, which I didn't think was possible for such a great movie. It has a lot of the same characters, such as Sophie, our main character, and Howl and his moving castle. However, Sophie's entire storyline is pretty different. She's the eldest of 3 sisters, and because of that, she is forced to stay home at her family's hat shop and run it for a little bit while her stepmother is off spending a lot of money. But then one day she meets Howl, she gets cursed, turns into an old lady, and the rest is the rest of the book. I picked up Momenta Adiechie's Dear Ajiawele, or A Feminist Manifesto in 15 Suggestions. This is a response to a letter that one of her childhood friends sent to her right before having a baby girl, asking how she can raise her baby to be a feminist, and this is her response in 15 suggestions. I picked up a poetry collection by Amanda Lovelace. The Princess Saves Herself in this one. I picked up her second collection, The Witch Doesn't Burn, in this one a couple of months ago. Still haven't read it, but I think I would read both of them back to back. I don't read a lot of poetry. In fact, I don't really like poetry, mostly because I've had bad experience with poetry in English class, but I think reading more poetry for fun and reading more modern poetry that's not 1912 modern poetry. I took a modern American poetry class a couple of semesters ago. I really didn't like it, and now I'm bitter towards poetry, but I think this will be fun, and it's a fun concept, and I've heard good things, so maybe it will cure me of the poetry hate I'm currently suffering from. I have the third book in the Wayward Children series by Seanan McGuire, Beneath the Sugar Sky. This takes place in a world of nonsense covered in sugar. It follows Rini, the daughter of Sumi, who was a character in Every Heart a Doorway. She is coming from her world of nonsense, asking people at the Home for Wayward Children to help her and help the world where she is coming from. Next is The Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society by Mary Ann Schaefer and Annie Barrows. I watched the Netflix movie before I even knew this was a book, and I loved it. It has Lily James and what's-his-face from Haunting of Hill House and people from Downton Abbey, so I was living my best life. And then I learned it was based on a book, so I had to pick this up. This is set post-World War II. Our main character is Juliet. She is a writer in London. One day she learns that there is a book club on the island of Guernsey, an island on the English Channel, and that book club and the connections they formed to the books and each other helped them get through the occupation by German soldiers during World War II. She decides to write a book on the book club, so she goes to Guernsey. She learns about them and their love of books. There's also some romance with multiple people. I have Homegoing by Yajasi, which takes place in 18th century Ghana. It follows two sisters, one who marries an English man and lives a life of comfort, and one who is sold into slavery. It then follows their parallel stories and 8 generations of their descendants going to the United States during the Civil War and Harlem during the Jazz Age. It follows the legacy of slavery, seeing how it didn't just affect the people who were enslaved, but it also affects their descendants. Like I mentioned several times before, I really enjoy stories that follow 2 different perspectives and 2 different points in time, but this follows 2 different perspectives and 8 different points in time. I have a book that I'm very excited for, Pride by readbyzoe, a modern Pride and Prejudice retelling, and if you know me, you know I love Pride and Prejudice. I haven't read a lot. Have I read any modern Pride and Prejudice retellings? I don't think so. I think I've just read Pride and Prejudice 77 times, and then I've watched a bunch of modern Pride and Prejudice movies. This takes place in Brooklyn. Our Elizabeth Bennet is Zuri Benitez. I think there's, yeah! Look at this artwork. It's beautiful. This is Zuri. She is proud of her Afro-Latina roots, and she's proud of her Brooklyn neighborhood. She does not want to see it being gentrified, but one day, the Darcys move in. This is Darius Darcy. He's rude, he's arrogant, he's not a fun person, but guess what? They fall in love and I'm excited. So it follows her reaction to the gentrification of the area, her romances with several people, including this man right here, and her even applying to college, which I think is something we need more in books. We need more talk about school. I've heard about a lot of modern adaptations, but I think this one sounds the most interesting. I have What If It's Us by Becky Albertalli and Adam Silvera, a contemporary romance that takes place in New York City. It follows 2 boys, Arthur and Ben, who meet at the post office when Ben is returning a box of his old boyfriend's stuff. They think each other is pretty darn cute, but it's New York City, so they get separated, and then they find their way to each other again. They go on a couple of dates though, and it doesn't go too well, but I think eventually they'll fall in love. If all is right with the world, they will fall in love because that's what I need. Next is Wondersmith, The Calling of Morgan Crow by Jessica Townsend, which is the sequel to Nevermore, The Trials of Morgan Crow, that's the name, by Jessica Townsend, which I read in 2017 and really enjoyed. It reminds me a lot of Harry Potter. It's a middle grade fantasy series with magic, fantastical beasts. I don't know what the sequel's about because I'm not going to read the back because I don't want to be spoiled. I just want to be transported to a nice cozy magical world for a couple of days. I have 2 books from one of my new favorite authors, Taylor Jenkins Reid, who wrote The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. Again, my favorite book of 2018. After I read Evelyn Hugo, I learned that that was not her first book. She had written several books prior to that, and I had to read them all. I still have not read all of them, but I'm making my way through slowly. I have read After I Do and Maybe in Another Life, though. After I Do follows a couple named Lauren and Ryan who have been together for I think over a decade. However, they've fallen out of love. There's no spark in their marriage, so they decide to spend one entire year completely without contact. They will not call each other, text each other, email each other, see each other, nothing. They're going to spend the time realizing what they want out of their marriage, what they want out of life. We follow Lauren as she spends time with friends and family, talking about what love is all about, what a relationship is all about, getting to know them and herself. Maybe in Another Life is like the movie Sliding Doors with Gwyneth Paltrow in it. Hannah, she moves back to Los Angeles. She's kind of been floating for her entire life so far. One day, she makes a decision which completely alters her life. This follows 2 possible storylines: if she does something and if she doesn't do something. There are different love interests, different job prospects. I have Becoming, Michelle Obama's memoir. I am so excited to get to this. I am in dire need of some inspiration from a smart, powerful lady. I'm excited to read about her life and learn how she became First Lady, how her and Barack Obama met. I'm excited about that. But she's so smart. She's done so much with her life. I also purchased the audiobook. I spent a lot of money on this reading experience that hasn't even happened yet, but I am ready for her to tell me her life story. Now I have 3 books that I purchased for the holiday season. I wanted some festive, Christmassy books, but looking at them, I realized that I've only read one of them so far. And it's January, the end of January, so do I wait 11 months to read them again? I'm always slow on reading the books that I have purchased. Hence why I'm going to the library more, because then I can just return them and the guilt will not follow me. The first book that I have already read is The Afterlife of Holly Chase by Cynthia Hand. This is a modern retelling of A Christmas Carol, which follows a Scrooge named Holly who did not learn the error of her ways. She just went on being a bad person and she died. In the afterlife, she's forced to become the ghost of Christmas past. She's still a bad person until one day a Scrooge catches her attention. It's a fun Christmassy read with a pretty unique concept. The next Christmassy book is Pride and Prejudice and Mistletoe by Melissa De La Cruz. I got it at Target and there was a 20% off sticker. This is another modern retelling of Pride and Prejudice, except it's gender bent. So Darcy Fitzwilliam is our main character, and Luke Bennett is Elizabeth Bennet. The last Christmassy book is One Day in December by Josie Silver. So many people who I watch on YouTube were reading this at exactly the same time. I think it was for one of the readathons. It's a festive contemporary romance, but then I forgot that I bought it. I was buying a lot of books around this time. I'm not buying a lot of books anymore. And the last 3 books that I purchased before we talk about my library books are the 3 books in the Grisha Trilogy by Leigh Bardugo. I had a lot of people, a lot of my close friends tell me to not bother with this series, to not even read it. Just go ahead and read Six of Crows because I'm reading these to get to Six of Crows. But no, I'm not going to cheat. People have told me that Six of Crows spoils this series. I'm not gonna do that. I'm gonna read them in their proper order. I've already read Shadow and Bone. This is a fantasy series inspired by imperialistic Russia. I love the atmosphere of this book. There are also Grisha, which are magic users. Not necessarily, they don't call it magic, but it's magic. I think it's a very interesting world and I understand why Leigh Bardugo wanted to stay in the world. Now time for the 8 books that I got from my local library. My local library is A+. There is at-home delivery, so I don't even have to leave my home to get library books. And I know there are ebook libraries, but I prefer to read physical books just personally. I kind of went a little bit crazy when I first came back home and got my library card renewed. I went on my library site and I checked out more than 8 books. Significantly more than 8 books. It was like I was scrolling through Amazon with an unlimited budget. I was checking out books that I had only heard of from friends. I didn't even have a desire personally to read them, but I thought, why not read outside my comfort zone and read all these books? But I got more books than I can realistically read in a month before I have to renew them. So I returned a bunch of them. These 8 have remained. I hopefully can control myself more in the future. The first book is The Poet X by Elizabeth Acevedo. This follows a teenager named Xiomara Batista who lives in Harlem. She lives with her very controlling and religious mother, and to release all of her frustration at her life and at her mother, she starts writing poetry and eventually starts doing slam poetry. I've heard that Elizabeth Acevedo also does slam poetry, and she narrates the audiobook, so I'm definitely going to have to borrow the audiobook somewhere so that I can listen to it. I am ready for these audiobook experiences. I have the 4th book in the Wayward Children series by Seanan McGuire, In an Absent Dream. This is about Lundy's backstory in the goblin market, which sounds like it's a story for me. Are there actual goblins in here? I hope so. I have another modern Pride and Prejudice retelling. What's the deal with me? I don't know, but this is eligible by Curtis Sittenfeld. I've had so many people recommend this book to me. My expectations are pretty high. Maybe they shouldn't be, but here we are. I just read inside the front cover, and Charles Bingley's name in here is Chip Bingley, and I hate that. In this book, Elizabeth, or Liz, and Jane live in New York City. Liz is a magazine writer, and they go back to Cincinnati, Ohio to help their parents take care of their crumbling home. Obviously, Darcy and Chip Bingley show up, and you know, the whole Pride and Prejudice stuff happens. I am now very wary of this because I see the words CrossFit and paleo diets in here. It sounds a little bit too modern for my taste, but maybe I'll like it. My next library book is The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle by Stuart Turton. At first it was just The 7 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle, but they had to add the half because it was too close to The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. Evelyn Hugo reigns supreme. This is a murder mystery book where Evelyn Hardcastle is murdered the same way each day for, I'm guessing, 7.5 days. Our main character, named Aiden, wakes up in a different body of somebody present for her death each day and has to figure out how Evelyn Hardcastle was murdered. But if he doesn't solve the murder before the day is over, he wakes up in the body of a new guest. This reminds me so much of those murder mystery dinners. I've never done one myself. The only reason I know about them is because of that one Lizzie McGuire episode where they do a murder mystery dinner, and I've always wanted to do one since that Lizzie McGuire episode. We then have The Kiss Quotient by Helen Huang, which I've heard is kind of explicit. It's a contemporary romance, but I think it edges towards PG-13 or R, which will be new for me. But okay. Our main character, Stella, has Asperger's and not a lot of dating experience or other experience, so she hires a male escort named Michael Fawn who teaches her things, and then I think they fall in love. I have Saco Girls by Claire Legrand, which I got to buddy read with my best friends Hannah from A Clockwork Reader and Haley from Haley in Bookland, but only Haley read it. Hannah and I have the book, but we haven't read it yet, so I renewed it. This takes place on an island called Sawkill Rock, and for decades, girls have been disappearing because of something. No one knows what it is, and they don't dare to come close to it until Marion, Zoe, and Val come together, and I hope they bring it down, or at least expose what it is. What if it's like Scooby-Doo, and they just take off the mask? I hope that's what it's like. Probably isn't. It's probably actually a monster. I also got If We Were Villains. I'm sorry how shiny all this is. If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio, which follows 7 Shakespearean actors who all go to a conservatory, and in their 4th and final year, their rivalries turn violent. 10 years later, after being released from jail, One of the Shakespearean actors named Oliver Marks is finally ready to tell the man who put him away what really happened. So it's about Shakespeare, acting, the stage, and maybe murder. It says that it explores the dangerous boundary between art and life. So do they kill somebody during like Macbeth or something? On stage, And finally, the last library book and the last book in this ridiculously long haul is Skyward by Brandon Sanderson, a YA sci-fi book. So many booktubers that I follow love Brandon Sanderson, and so many people have recommended me Brandon Sanderson over the years, but I've been afraid to read his books because they are quite chunky, adult high fantasy. I'm not ready for Brandon Sanderson original yet, so I'm going to read his YA sci-fi first. This is about a girl named Spencer who lives in a futuristic world and wants to go to flight school. She wants to fly amongst the stars. I accidentally just flipped to this page and it has images of spaceships. They look like Star Wars spaceships. This is so cool. I hope there are more images, but I don't want to spoil myself, so I'm just going to put this away. Anyway, those were the, I don't even know how many books that I just hauled. A lot of them. I'm losing my voice. Sorry about that. I sound nice and husky now though, so you're welcome. Thank you so much for watching my first library book haul. I will do more of these in the future, and I will talk to you all soon in my next video. Bye!